Hello, welcome to Let's Code with Brett Matthey. Today we're going to go over unit testing in ASP.NET Core application using xUnit. So this is the xUnit homepage, and there's some documentation in here on how to use xUnit as well as getting started guides. So the first thing I did when I was getting started was I went to this getting started with xUnit.net, and I noticed that there's no documentation. And the reason why is because in Visual Studio 2017 there will be built-in support for the xUnit.net projects, whereas what we're going to go through today with Visual Studio 2015, it's a manual process to get the project added and running. But it's not too hard, there's not too many steps, so I think that we should go ahead and get started with 2015. So one other thing I want to point out here is there's a document on the MSDN website called Unit Testing in .NET Core using .NET Test. If you found this document here, what this is doing is it's setting up your projects using the .NET CLI. The problem with this is the .NET CLI, when you use .NET New, it does not create a solution file, nor does it create your project files. So if you're not using Visual Studio, if you're using something like .NET Code, this is probably the route you want to go. However, what I'm going to show is how to test using Visual Studio. Alright, the first thing we want to do is go ahead and create a new project, and we're just going to create the boilerplate ASP.NET Core Web Application Web API. So we'll call this Web API xUnit example. We'll select Web API, click OK, and then we'll watch the solution folder get generated. The project folder will get generated. We should have a global JSON file and then a source directory. So here's our source directory. There's our project folder, and inside the project folder we have our files. Now, after we have our Web API, the next thing we want to do is create a test folder in the solution, and then we'll have to create a test folder in here as well to link the solution folder to the physical folder. So we'll go back over here, right click on solution, add new folder. We'll call it test. We'll jump back over to folder explorer, and in here we'll have to create the same folder, call it test. And once you do that, these two folders are linked. The physical folder will be linked with the solution folder. So next we're going to add our project. So like I was saying, there's no template for an xUnit.NET Core project. So what we have to do is create a console application, and then we're going to have to modify the project JSON file to make it more into a library rather than a console app. Now the reason why I'm choosing console application here is because it sets up the project JSON file to closely resemble what we need for .NET Test to run. If we created a class library, the JSON file uses Net Standard 1.6, and that's not what we need to run the test. So we'll create our console application, we'll call it unit tests. Alright, so it generates the project under the test folder, so let's verify that that is in this physical folder here as well. Now we're going to be running our tests from the command line using .NET. So we'll go ahead and just browse to the folder here. So if we go into test, we should see our unit test. Shoot, it didn't do it. Okay, sometimes the folders don't link up and it's hit or miss, which is kind of a pain, because I can run this thing 5 times and sometimes it links the folders and sometimes it doesn't. That's very frustrating. So if it doesn't link the folders for you, what we can do is exit out of Visual Studio. We'll save the solution. That may have been the problem. It may have been that I didn't save the solution after that test folder was generated. But we'll just drag this in the test folder here. And let's see what happens if we just open up the solution folder or the solution file here. Let's see if it still maintained the nesting properly inside of the solution. Okay, so it says load failed here. So what we're going to have to do is manually edit the solution file. So hopefully for you guys this doesn't happen, but for me it did. So I think all we have to do here is just put test backslash and then save it. Now let's go back to Visual Studio and see if we can't get this to load. Reload all. Okay. Alright, there we go. So now we should be up and running. Alright, now we're up and running. Alright, so I guess when you create the test folder here, just make sure to save the file, and I think that's the linking problem. Alright, now that we have everything set up how we want, we're going to start adding our dependencies to this unit test project. But before we do that, what we want it to do is remove this program file. Because this is not going to be run as a console application, we do not need this program file here. So we'll remove this. Now when you do that, if we try to build, the build's actually going to fail because we have this emit entry point true here, and it's got the Visual Studio is going to complain that it can't find a static main method. So once we remove this block and build again, it should build successfully. Alright, now with everything building successfully, now we can go ahead and add xUnit. So there's two dependencies for xUnit we need to install. One is the xUnit library itself. That will be version 2.2. And the next dependency is the .NET Test xUnit package. And what that does is when you run .NET Test in the command line, it will use the xUnit test runner. So .NET-test-xUnit. Now, there's one thing I want to point out here. You have to have include pre-releases checked, otherwise it will not show up. There hasn't been a major release yet. So if you click include pre-release, you can see the preview build here, and that's what we'll be using. Now once that's installed, we're going to jump back to the project.json file. There's one last step here, and that's to add a test runner. So under version, if you start typing in test, you'll see IntelliSense will tell you that there's a command called test runner, or a property called test runner. So we're going to add that, and then we're going to tell it to use xUnit. Okay, so everything should build after that, and now we should be able to add our first test. So let's look at the web API. Under controllers, this values controller is what we want to test. Specifically, what we're going to test is the get endpoint returns two values. So under our test unit project, we're going to add a new class, and we're going to call it values controller underscore get. So what this means is that we're testing the class called values controller, and we're specifically testing the get method. So our first test, they always start with fact. So each test starts with either fact or theory. And I'm not going to go into all the details of xUnit itself and how to test. That can be for a different video, or you can just read the documentation. But this first test, this first test, we're going to test that the get endpoint should return 2 values. And the way we're going to do that is create our controller, new values controller. Okay, it looks like I forgot to add the project reference, so we'll do that really quick. Add reference, select the Web API project, and in here we should get prompted to add, there we go, that reference. Okay. Alright, next thing we're going to want to do is actually call the get endpoint, so we'll set a result object to the controller.get call. Then we'll add our assertion. Our expected value is 2, and what we're actually testing is the result.count. So let's build that. And then we'll run it in the command line. So in the command line, I'm in the test folder, so we actually need to be in the project folder. So we'll browse to the project folder, then we can run .NET space test. And you can see that 1 unit test ran and it passed. So now let's go ahead and see what a failed test looks like. So we'll change this to invalidate the test. When we run .NET test again, it will build the project first, and then it will run the test. And you can see that 1 failed, and up here it tells you that it tells you the class that failed, the method that failed, and the expected result and the actual result. So one last thing before we go is I do have ReSharper installed, and with 2016.3, the version 2016.3, the test runner will actually run xUnit test. So we'll go ahead and run that, and we'll look at it. There's one thing I want to point out, and I'm not sure if this is just a bug that I experienced with one of my solutions, but there is a bug where if you have several tests under one class here, sometimes they don't all show up. That's just one thing to look out for. However, even though they don't show here, it will actually run. So in this case, our test is showing a failed test, so we'll fix this, save the file, and run it again, and you'll see it pass. Alright, and that's really about it. So when 2017 comes out, Visual Studio 2017, I will update the video, or actually add a new video, and we can look at the new features for xUnit in 2017. Alright, thank you for watching.